5 years experience. I have spent 9 of those years altogether at the SABC, first as a political editor, group political editor, between 2002 and 2006, and then between 2011 and now in various other capacity. My title at the moment, I go by the title of contributing editor. I have a very specific brief to focus on broadcasts of national importance, everything from the opening of Parliament, celebrations of national days, like Freedom Day, like Reconciliation Day. I'm the lead anchor when it comes to such events as, for instance, the official funerals of former heads of state or other people who get official funerals. A part of my brief also is to give commentary and analysis on issues of national importance, whether, for example, a civilian plane unexpectedly lands at Waterkloof, or state organs are at each other's throat, or the goings-on between and within political parties. Broadly speaking, the body politic. That's what I do. And maybe I should add that it was a special arrangement given the challenges that the SABC said it faced, but also how they thought I could then help fill the gaps where those gaps had been identified. Taking into account, of course, my experience and the previous roles that I had played at the SABC. My colleagues have outlined in great detail some of the unfortunate events that have brought us where we are today. Like all of them, I'm hopeful that this inquiry will go a long way towards helping all of us get to the bottom of what went wrong and hopefully come up with very concrete steps to rectify the problems that have been identified since last week. Let me hasten to add that we are not here to present ourselves as people who know everything there is to know about broadcasting, or even the nature of the problems that we're seeing at the SABC. We are no cleverer than any of our colleagues, more than 1,000 of them, who, I believe, given a chance, they too would have wanted to come here and relate their own stories. We're not coming here with a holier-than-thou attitude either, for we believe that in certain instances we may have been just as complicit as a lot of people who remain at the SABC, or those who may have gone. But we do believe that we're bringing hopes and aspirations of the people who work in that newsroom and who want to see change, and want to see change like yesterday. We hope that by sharing the insights that we've had, Lucanio, Krivani, and Tandeka sharing, you will work with us and with everybody else who believes something really needs to be done and needs to be done now. Very briefly, how did I come to be part of this group of called the SABC 8? I was sitting in my office it was on a Monday, July 4. There was a briefing taking place in Mill Park. First of all, I never got to understand even why we were taking this particular briefing line. It was a very mundane briefing. Started by musicians, music promoters, artists, taking turns singing the praises of one Mr. Hlaudi Mutsuneng, in large part for the decision to play 90% local content on SABC radio stations. Then the focus suddenly changed into like insults and criticism of anyone who was seen to be against Mr. Motsoeneng. People were being labeled, and all sorts of things were being said about them being reactionary and about them being captured by big capital that wants to capture the SABC. Now, for someone who has employed some of the people who are at the SABC, or who has had an influence in bringing in some young, energetic journalist who really wanted to make a difference. For someone who had seen colleagues turning into animals that could no longer recognize. For someone who was seeing people with great potential, but who were sitting there hopelessly, not knowing what to do, and just getting on with whatever they could do on a day for as long as it didn't threaten their job, or for as long as they were not to get into doing just as much to make sure, or making every effort to ensure that they never got into trouble. For someone who had seen bosses that I had always spoken to, that I would walk into certain people's offices without having to make an appointment to discuss things that were going on in the newsroom, as we sought to do the best that we could do. And to see those people having changed completely from what they once were to animals we could no longer recognize was painful. So I wrote this piece, and it was published in independent newspapers, The Star, Pretoria News, and others. A couple of weeks before, the colleagues who are here and the other three that are not here had been suspended for merely pointing out the wrongs that were taking place at the SABC. The previous Friday, joined by other journalists, civil society organizations, some of whom are here, they had marched to the SABC and to Constitution Hill to highlight the plight of journalists at the SABC, but to bring, perhaps more importantly, to bring to the attention of South Africa the shenanigans that were going on there. Now, from the speeches of the people who were gathered at this Mill Park place hotel where there was this briefing, a briefing which, it must be underlined, the news division was told to cover and to cover live as far as possible. My colleagues were traitors. My colleagues didn't support the 90% local content thing that Hlaude Motsoeneng had spearheaded. They were part of some conspiracy to capture the SABC and to destroy the proud legacy of Mr. Motsoeneng. I got worried because, for nothing could have been further from the truth. My worry turned into fear when some of the people who were at this briefing started speaking a language that said they were prepared to lay down their lives from Comrade Hlaude and those types of things. Because growing up in the township in the late 70s and in the 80s, one got to witness, consequences of some of what happened, where well-meaning people who were zealously guarding their struggle would be told by misinformed or less informed people that Nansi Mbimbi, and everyone would run after that person. They would be beaten to a pulp. Their homes would be burnt down. or they would be necklaced. All because someone acted on misinformation. And the enemies of our struggle in those days were quick to use what was happening at the time to discredit what was a very legitimate struggle of the people of this country. Having personally witnessed or knowing of various incidents of intimidation, of censorship, and of improper interference in editorial decisions at the SABC, I knew that my colleagues had been suspended for speaking the truth, and their actions had nothing to do with the conspiracies that they were being accused of. They were being persecuted for their courage to speak against indiscretions that no journalist ought to put up with. I went home that evening very troubled, and I decided to write that piece. The piece, within the limitations imposed by 900 words, sought to give a historical context to what is currently happening at the SABC, how challenges that generations of South Africans grappled with as they tried to change the SABC from a propaganda machine of the apartheid government to an instrument that can educate, inform, and entertain South Africans. The article showed or tried to show how some of the people who were tasked with transforming the SABC at times faltered. In fact, muddied the waters and leaving behind them a trail of destruction. In the face of denials by some, including the minister, including the executive at the SABC, that there was censorship, my article sought to point out specific instances that I thought debunked the myths that were being perpetrated by those who were responsible for running or looking after the SABC. The article argued that it was wrong to use legitimate causes like the plight of our artists. We know that some of our artists died paupers. I argued that it was wrong to use such acts as the destruction of public property by criminals and thugs to camouflage illegal or irrational decisions that the executive, with being aided and abetted by the board, were taking. The article stated that people do differ or come from different vantage points, but there are laws in this country. There are regulations and procedures at the SABC or resting with the regulator to ensure that we deal with those issues. You don't wake up and declare policy. There are ways to do that. The day after the article was published, I was, of course, effectively suspended to this day. The SABC said I'd breached the terms of my contract, which I obviously disputed. They then said they were investigating the matter further, and while they were investigating, they would not schedule me, so I would not be paid. So I remain in limbo. I've been to the High Court to challenge that decision, but the judge essentially refused to hear the case, arguing that I was putting the cart before the horse because the SABC was still busy with an investigation. We should wait until that investigation is completed and only then approach the courts if need be. Of course, more than 5 months later, nothing has come of that investigation. And that's despite the fact that the very same Judge Fritz van Oosten specifically asked the SABC not only to expeditiously resolve the dispute, but also to attend to the matters I had raised with in my affidavit. And those matters were matters dealing with censorship and improper orders being given to journalists. I suppose just like they did with the Public Protector report on the Hlaudi Motsoeneng issues, with large parts of that judgment being in its favor, the SABC chose to ignore the rest of the things that the judge had asked it to do. Maybe I should point out that while the matter was still before the High Court, the SABC did ask me to withdraw my public statements, the things I had written, the things I had put in affidavits, in return for being returning to work, which I obviously refused, for the things I had said were true. And perhaps I should highlight before the committee that Mr. Chairman and the committee, in its replying papers, the SABC didn't contest or dispute any of the things that I had written in either the article that I wrote or the affidavits that I have filed with the courts under oath. In my court papers challenging the SABC's decision not to schedule me, I cite specific incidents of censorship and intimidation. I mentioned, for example, how a show that I was hosting, On the Record, was abruptly canned, incidentally, the day after I had Thuli Madonsela, among others, as a guest on the show, and subsequently announced during that same show that the next day we would be discussing this phenomenon or concept of state capture. The show, that was the last day the show was on air. One Jimmy Matthews, the next day, wanted me disciplined for merely tweeting that there would be no show that evening. In another instance, Hlaudi Motsoeneng ordered through acting political editor Sophie Mokoena that I be told to not even mention the ANC while analyzing DA or EFF manifestos. I mean, it's analysis. In another instance, Notando Maseko, who was the acting head of news at the time, cut out, this was February last year, 2015, cut out, without consulting me, bits of a pre-recorded interview I did with the president after the State of the Nation address. Those are only some of the incidents that I had, just some of the incidents that I'd highlighted in both my affidavits and in the piece that I wrote. Enough about me, Honorable Chair and Honorable Members, except to say the journalists you are seeing here in front of you are not part of any conspiracy to oust one Hlaudi Motsoeneng or anybody for that matter. If there are people plotting to capture the SABC, as it is being alleged, we want to be the first to expose them. And that's exactly why we're here. Millions of South Africans still depend on the 4 television channels and 18 radio stations that are under the control of the SABC for their news. We dare not fail them. Our news has to be truthful. Our news has to be credible. Credibility is our only currency. So we need your help to restore the credibility and integrity of the news that we put out there. Together, let's use this opportunity, let's use this inquiry to protect and cushion the biggest newsroom in this country from political and financial pressures, and from those aspiring celebrities and, dare I say, crooks. The SABC exists ostensibly to inform, to educate, and to entertain. Imagine an SABC journalist's dilemma, having to write and analyze matric results. At the same briefing, your editor-in-chief says, in front of the Minister of Education, he doesn't believe in the value of education. He tells matriculants who are getting their certificates on the day that what they consider to be something that's going to open doors to the rest to what is a brighter future is in fact not worth the paper that is written on. That it is in fact a worthless piece of paper. Now, as parliamentarians, you approve budgets. You know that we spend more on education in this country than we spend on any other vote. And there's a reason for that. It's because we value education. We know where it can take us as a nation. But the editor-in-chief, of course, of your national broadcaster is going to tell you that all that many educated people know how to do is to read the whole day. They don't have time to think. Don't ask me about matric certificate. Ask me if I can do the job. We need to make people like Cloudy in the SABC, he says. Now, in addition to educating and informing, the SABC has to entertain. And the reason you are laughing is because it's funny. The things he says are very funny. If only they were not, or the implications thereof were not as serious. Certainly coming from an editor-in-chief of an important national institution that's supposed to inform, educate, and entertain the people of this country. What SABC executives haven't informed you about is that they have allowed SABC money to be used to build a rival channel, ANN 7. Morning Live resources get diverted to pay for the production costs of those TNA breakfasts that you see. Yet the money that the owners of TNA make, none of it, not a cent, goes to the SABC. From the millions they make through sponsorship to the tables that they sell at those breakfasts, they do not spend, they do not take any of that to the SABC, except perhaps to the people who make things happen for them. SABC News spends 2, 3, sometimes $500,000 for one of those TNA breakfasts, I'm told, to put it on air, because we pay for the production costs. We pay for the presenters to be there, for the presenters, for all those people, that whole tribe that has to travel to Bloemfontein or to the Northern Cape to do those broadcasts. The owners of TNA don't pay any of that money. And they've been open. When they couldn't succeed in taking over the news of the SABC, they put up a rival channel to take on the SABC. But it's the SABC that has to pay for its downfall and to build this alternative channel. Now, the SABC does periodic appraisals of the performances of its news bulletins and its current affairs programs. Those ARs, if you were to ask the SABC to furnish you with that information, will show you how we are bleeding, how we are ceding ground to competition, how we're using our money that we are supposed to bring better bulletins, better current affairs programs to prep up competitors. But then, maybe you'd be wasting time, because the editor-in-chief of the SABC once said that he doesn't believe in scientific research, he believes in practicality. As I try to conclude, the big questions are, how did we get here, and what do we do? I'd be lying if I suggested to you that the problems we are seeing at the SABC are new, as my colleagues have said. There were attempts to censor before. There were attempts by newsmakers or people close to them to lean on those in charge at the SABC for us to come up with particular narratives on certain stories. So not all was hunky-dory. I mean, I remember back in, I think it was 2004, the NGC of the ANC. One of the questions we put to the president at the time, President Thabo Mbeki, was whether he wanted to stay on as an ANC president, which was a legitimate question to ask. After a lot of toing and froing, he eventually told me that, yes, he would do so if the ANC wanted him to do that. I remember how the chief spokesperson of the ANC at the time stormed the room, because it was a pre-recorded interview which was going to go on air only hours later. Then he says, the bit about staying on as ANC president is going to be a big problem. I'm like, tough. You know? So he says, no, we have to find a way of removing that bit. I'm like, but we can't. And then he kept going on to a point where President Mbeki said, no. I know why Vuyo asked that question. I think he told me that he wanted to run, for president. And then he laughed and then took the rest of the officials out of the room, and they went to where they were supposed to go. I remember at the NGC when, as some of you would remember, sorry if I'm... at the time, the current president was the deputy president of the ANC. He had been stripped of his powers as the deputy president of the ANC. He was that only by name. And he had also been axed as the deputy president of the country. As many of you would know, at that NGC, of course, the matter was put on the table, and there were lots of people who didn't like that. And the SABC was chosen, or people thought we could do miracles to change the narrative. Again, as the person was in charge of the political team at the time, we refused. We refused. I remember in another Mbeki interview, when the head of news at the time tried to get us not to ask certain questions. Myself, Pippa Green, and Jimmy Matthews stood up and said, you're not going to do that. But the point I'm making is that even though there had been, in other words, the things we are seeing and the things that my colleagues have been talking about are not necessarily new. We have never gotten to the point. We have never sunk as low as we have sunk now. I mean, there were those instances, but people at the time, some of them, bad as we thought they were, at least they had the decency, to listen. At least they knew that certain lines could not be crossed. They knew that there was a point at which you listen to those around you. They had the decency to appreciate that the SABC belongs or is there to serve the people of South Africa, not themselves. That there was a limit to how far you can go to undermine the collective intelligence of South Africans and impugn their integrity. But if you look at some of the things that have happened, where you just cut an interview of a president, not because they've asked for it, but you're second guessing. You canning shows, as Krivani, has said. Those things are wrong, and we're asking you, and we're saying we are at your disposal, together with the more than 1,500 people who work in the news division at the SABC. We are saying, let's work on this. There are a few ideas that many of them, my colleagues have already spoken about, how internally we can deal with some of the things. But perhaps we also need to go back. As many of you, or some of you may recall, back in 1992, 1993, we got together as a nation. We're facing serious threats at the time. We wanted change had to come, but people realized that certain things could not be done if institutions like the SABC were still under the control of certain people and were not there at the disposal of everyone to, so to speak, level the playing fields. Some of you will recall how even the first board of the SABC was appointed. It was an open process, very public. Everyone was scrutinized, their qualifications, their schools of thought, their world view. Even when the president at the time, F.W. de Klerk, tried to steer that process in a different direction, refusing to appoint certain people who were deserving. He was exposed, and as soon as we had gone past the election, former President Nelson Mandela changed all that and put a proper board that looked, or at least tried to do what the SABC ought to do. Those men and women tried their level best. Of course, there were challenges. They succeeded to a lesser or greater extent to do certain things, but then they passed the baton on to others. But somewhere along the way, we dropped the ball. In such instances, for example, as when the Minister of Communications came to Parliament and said, give the COO all the editorial powers, make him the editor-in-chief. Maybe no one saw it coming. No one thought that that posed a danger. But it was instances like those that brought us to where we are. We're saying we're here and let's try and deal with them. We're here to help you do that. And so I'm sure are millions of South Africans. Thank you.
Honorable Mokoena, your 5 minutes starts now.
Thank you, Chair. I'm interested in continuing with the line of questioning that I had earlier on. There was manipulation. We know of extensive manipulation of information, especially about the EFF, especially around that period of the elections in 2014. If you could elaborate on any other examples, we would appreciate that. And then, two, I just want to rely on your collective memory, your collective experience, and the time span that you've had as journalists, and just take me back to the history of Hlaudi Motsoeneng. He comes from the Free State. And I know for a fact that in the Free State, there's huge manipulation, especially of Lesedi FM, which I've been told is controlled from the Premier's office. And he does that through the support of Hlaudi Motsoeneng. And I do want to examine that trajectory, because I think it will take us to the to the origin of the problem. I'll end there, and then if there's more time, I'll ask more questions.
Thanks very much, sir. I don't offhand, unfortunately, can't recall any further incidents where, particularly here in Parliament, there was an issue with us in the EFF. I think it was on those two issues that related to the banning of the footage that relate to the EFF that I can recall off the top of my head. But other than that, really, I think we got to a stage in the office where there would be enough of resistance coming from us as the journalists to make sure, for instance, that whatever unlawful or unethical instructions were coming, we would fight. In our office, I doubt that there's anybody that's got less than 10 years experience working as a journalist. So it's quite a senior office, if you could call it that. And we really, the understanding that we have is that the office in Johannesburg considers us a problematic office, to the sense that we don't necessarily toe the line. I'll make you an example. I know you asked about the EFF, so sorry. But for instance, the responsibility...
So also just save my time so that we can...
Sorry. If I could just make this example. As the parliamentary office, whenever the president appears in the House, we can't report on that. If the president is here in Parliament, as an office, we can't report on that. It must be done by remote in Johannesburg. As just an example. I'm sorry.
Well, there's an incident I remember. I went to, I think it was the anniversary of Marikana, if I'm not mistaken, which was a story, like I went there. We're a team. Where upon we had technical problems in Rustenburg. So we had to drive back with the camera guy, and because we were running really close, though, I had to do the story, even though someone else was going to do it, just so that we can speed things up. And when I got to the office, the assignment editor on duty on the day said an instruction had come from Mr. Matthews that we should not use the leader of the EFF on the story. I, of course, called him and told him that we were going to use it because that decision would have been arbitrary and there was no particular reason why we wouldn't. And he said something along the lines of what he once told Lucanio, that as long as it is not going to put him in something. I remember also another incident where I think it was the first fallout between Andile Mngxitama and the EFF leadership. And there again, every effort was made for us to get onto the story, to interview him and so on. No prizes for guessing why that was. With regard to Mr. Motsoeneng, frankly, I don't know him much except as a producer between 2002 and 2006, when he was a producer at Lesedi. He was one of the producers who would call me as the political editor at the time to go on their shows, current affairs shows, to do whatever they would ask me to do. Fast forward to 2011, when I got back to the SABC, Initially, my first brief was to do election debates. But 2 weeks before we started with the election debates, Mr. Phil Molefe asked me to do the sort of customary interview with the president, post-State of the Nation interview with the president. And
15 seconds.
Okay, on the day, just to cut a long story short, on the day, I saw another side of Mr. Motsoeneng. He walked into the parliamentary office. We were there with Mr. Molefe. And then the first thing he said was he didn't understand. It was me and Mr. Molefe. And then he said he was in the newsroom where the rest of the journalists were, and he didn't understand why they didn't stand up for him when he walked in. And then when we went to Dane Ace an hour later to speak to the president, I did the interview, and after doing the interview, I was doing some, the pleasantries and doing small talk with the president. He then walked in and said, and waiting for me to finish, which I didn't feel the sort of an urgent need to do. And while I was still talking to the president, the door opens, and it was Mr. Molefe. The way Mr. Motsoeneng chased Mr. Molefe out of that door is something that still ignores in my mind still. And I don't know how a head of news at the time, which Mr. Molefe was, could be chased away like a dog as Mr. Motsoeneng did.
Thank you, sir.
But that's the little that I know about him, apart from everything else that I've said.
Ngizamile Putwa. Ngizamile, 7 minutes. 7 minutes, Ngizamile. Was it 10 minutes? I'm being nice to him. Mr. Masangu.
Chair, thank you.
Your 5 minutes starts now.
Thank you, Chair. Just one quick question. Please just answer with one word. Are the journalists, yourselves and whoever else, still getting threats from Mr. Motsoeneng and company?
We don't know for sure where the threats come from. But I think reasonable people can make assumptions about who would have a stake or an interest in the story that has been told over the past week, for it not to be told. But as this collective of journalists, we felt the issues we're putting before you are more important than anything that has happened to any one of us. We would urge you to put what we're putting before you first. And we have been told, we have been assured that the police are still busy investigating. We'll await the outcome of that, but we do, we're saying it comes with the territory. We've chosen to come forward and volunteer the information that we have, and we would want that to be the focus.
Thank you. Chair, I think, Chairperson, we must take some measure of responsibility us as parliamentarians for failure to protect and salvage the SABC. Failure in our oversight, and I think we can't dig our heads in the sand. Some of us have just learned about this, but it is a reflection of our failure to do our work. Let me make a commitment, Chair, as we were celebrating the 20th anniversary of the Constitution, to restate what that Constitution contains in subsection 16 of Chapter 2 in the Bill of Rights. That commitment is what we, as elected representatives, took an oath before the nation and the world and said, we shall live by this. And I think on behalf of the collective here, and I think for the 460 members of Parliament, we must make that commitment that we will stand by yourselves. We will rescue this national asset from the morass that we have allowed it to get into. Well, I've been asking a question as to who is Mr. Motsoeneng, and I've not received a sufficient response, but I'm fine. I think whatever we have, we will live with it, but I think we still have a responsibility to smoke him out and really understand as to what and who are we dealing with. I'm happy that I will not be receiving any response because I think I just wanted to make that statement, Chair. Thank you.
I thank you, sir. Honorable Swartz.
Thank you, Chairperson. And again, we wish to commend you for your courage in coming forward. Thank you for the information that you've shared with us, and we take it very earnestly. And as Mr. Mshlangu said, we owe you a debt of gratitude and an apology for not exercising our oversight properly. And we trust that it will be a seminal moment moving forward with the information that you've shared with us. One does wonder, however, what the power behind Mr. Motsoeneng, because the information that one of the examples that was given was at the matric certificate handing out, where there was a statement made about matric certificates being useless. Why on earth did the Minister of Education not countermand that outrageous statement? So that does suggest that Mr. Motsoeneng at that stage might have had support from right to the top, President Zuma. Would you care to comment on that?
Except to say, Honorable Swartz, that it baffles us just as much as it baffles you.
Thank you. Then I'd like more information. Another issue that came up earlier was the issue of the editors' program being canned because it gave publicity to a newspaper, other newspapers. And now we hear about the New Age breakfasts being funded by the SABC indirectly, which is directly contradicting why that other why the editors' program was canned. But surely, as you say, this is startling again, that SABC funds are being used, Morning Live funds, as you've indicated, are being used to fund a rival television station. Are you able to give us, maybe in writing, more information on that issue? You might have sources or something that you might be able to give us, because that, to me, is outrageous and can also impact upon the financial stability of the SABC going forward. And of course, the issue relating to the Gupta family comes up very strongly in that regard. Do you have more information on that?
We're under oath, aren't we? So, as I have said, the SABC pays for the costs of, if, for example, when I had, I was anchoring, say, on the record, if I want to go and record an episode, whether it's at the Apartheid Museum or anywhere for that matter, I have to then have the budget. My unit has to have the budget to then go and, Now, someone is going to argue, or will probably argue, that it's internal costs. But when you've exhausted it, you've exhausted it. If, for example, Morning Live 3, 4, 5 months before the end of the financial year wants to do whatever it wants to do an OB, like a very legitimate one. Let's say it wants to go to Marikana on the back of what the presidency announced a few days ago. It may be told that you can't go and do that very critical story because you've already exhausted your funds. And that's a direct impact that something like that has. And if I tell you that they even wanted more. A few years ago when I was doing Sunday Live, we started Sunday Live, they came and that had already been agreed to. I don't know by who. But I was summoned to an office only to be told that from next month, TNA is going to take 1 week every month to do provincial TNAs. What that meant was that each month, you're going to go to the Free State, to the Eastern Cape, and so on and so on. And how that was going to happen, I was told, was that I'd stand on the stage, do the openings and all of that. And then a second presenter from TNA would go and be with the crowd and everybody else. They would then ask the audience the questions. And how the audience was going to be, like 50% of the invitees would come from the host province. In other words, the premier and the MECs would invite 50%, and then 25% would come from TNA, and 25% would come from the SABC, meaning 75% would come from people that they would have invited, and their anchor would have been in control of what goes out on air. And this is a news program or current affairs.
Honorable Khoza.
Chair, I want to align myself with what Honorable Swart has just expressed. And especially to you, Mr. Mvoko, I think one has to acknowledge the loss of income and the pain and that your family has had to endure, not just yourself. I think it's important for us to do that. And if you would kindly be monosyllabic, I just want yes or no answer in this particular question. Is there sufficient appreciation at SABC that it has to be self-sustaining because the national fiscus is under immense pressure due to the service delivery backlogs that we have in South Africa and the poverty levels that we have in the country? Is there appreciation, sufficient appreciation, at least by your board members or Mivin Mutswaneng and those people?
There isn't, Honorable Khoza.
Okay. How are advertisement revenues being negatively impacted by the news censorship and the other policies emanating from the opus of totalitarianism at SABC?
If I may, ma'am.
Yes.
Well, I can't really tell you about how advertising revenues, what the numbers are. But I can tell you that, as Mr. Mvoko has already alluded to, journalists and news, we function on the whole premise of credibility. Everything around news is based on credibility. Now, if you and I go to a press conference, Mr. Smith, who is the chairperson, says this, but I go and I report something else, or I put a slant on what Mr. Smith has said, and you go and you report what Mr. Smith has said, I lose credibility in that. If the minute that I lose credibility, I lose audience ratings. People don't watch my news because they don't trust, they don't believe that we are reporting the news to them. So the advertisers look at the numbers and they say, but we can't advertise there because the audience ratings are down.
I think that answers my question. And I want to, this is brutally provocative. Over the weekend, we saw the top 250 richest people in South Africa. And one of the Gupta brothers is now worth 10 billion, more than even Petrus Matsepe. Will it be reasonable to attribute some of this to the erosion of the moral code in doing business with the state and state entities?
Do I?
Okay, sorry.
Well, I think a lot of people have spoken, or a lot has been written also about that company or those proprietors, their way of doing business. So maybe Thandeka can expand on it. But certainly from where I'm coming from, as someone who is obviously deprived of resources to be competitive, for the SABC to be able to do what it is supposed to do, it can only mean one thing: that someone is being enriched or enriched further, but unfortunately at the expense of your national public broadcaster. That goes without saying.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Honorable Oliver.
Thanks, Chair. Mr. Mvoko, sometimes when you don't want to appear as being too critical, you tend to hang yourself. I'm raising that because at your introductory part of the report, you say, we are not coming here with a holier-than-thou attitude either. Is this implying that you also had a fair share in putting SABC to the state it is now?
Honorable Loliwe, there is something that journalists say is self-censorship. It's a huge part of what is wrong at the SABC, because people have had to think about their livelihoods. People have had to, because openly, there's something called rediffusion at the SABC, where the executive or the board speaks to staff, and all the regions and offices are linked. People will be told in no uncertain terms that if they don't toe the line, they will be out. As my colleague said previously, as Thandeka and Krivani said, that you would be told in no uncertain terms, that it's the door or the window. You would be told that if you don't accept what management tells you to do, there are lots and lots of journalists waiting. Please indulge me just for another 15, 20 seconds, Chair. On the day, we had in the run-up to the election, in fact, we were preparing for the election, we had a workshop at the VAL. And Mr. Motsoeneng came and addressed that gathering. And what happened, a few things happened there. One of them was people asking questions. Among the questions, for instance, a question that I asked was how he was treating our bosses, and the fact that he was undermining them, and how that was doing to the morale in the newsroom, but also to the standards that we are supposed to uphold. And I told him, because I said, I know this from what I was told when my show was canned by so-and-so and so-and-so, who told me that you guys did it. There, we had also invited a seasoned journalist who was also like an executive director at SANEF, but also someone who had worked at the SABC as the deputy head of news, to give us an outsider's look of or sort of appraisal or appreciation of what we were doing. Because of all those things, the next day it was a bloodbath. The three people who were acting in positions above those of theirs, which was Notando Maseko, it was Nyana Mulite, and no, I think it was Sibulelo, not sure, were all taken back to their position. He walked in the next morning very angry that such things could happen under his watch. They were all demoted, and a new head of news was appointed on the spot, the person who is now the head of news.
Oh, thanks. SABC once had a board What role has the board played to defend the ills that were happening there?
Ma'am, I don't think that the board has ever defended. I think they contributed. There have been many times, for instance, when we would be called to a rediffusion, and you would sit there for 2 hours, and the board would essentially endorse whatever Mr. Mutsuneng said. It would actively participate. For me personally, the current chairperson, he's the most recent in me having sitting through rediffusion. Nobody wants to sit. You see, there's certain things that happen at the SABC, and a rediffusion is one of those things where it's a right royal complete waste of time. But I work at the SABC. I'm an ant. I'm a minion. You know, so if I'm told I must go sit in the rediffusion, I must go sit in the rediffusion and listen to the board essentially participating in the denigration and the abuse of the SABC. So I can't recall an instance where I sat there and I thought, whoa, the board is actually defending. The board had always, in my opinion, participated in what was going on there, man.
Honorable Van Damme.
Thanks, Chair. I would once again like to congratulate you guys for standing up for what is right. I want to assure you that your efforts are not in vain. We will not be letting go of this issue. As you know, we've been fighting this issue for years. Colleagues before me fought it in the Communications Committee against ANC members who refused to act. I have been fighting this matter in the Communications Committee. We've been in and out of court for years and spent millions making sure that we bring the ANC, the SABC towards stability. So we're not letting this matter go. Now, I asked earlier about Mr. Mutsuneng's enforcers, because I think those enforcers need to also be held accountable. Everyone's responsible for their actions. Now, an enforcer who's like a golden thread through all of this is Mr. Jimmy Matthews, who has now kind of found his backbone, but that doesn't absolve him of all his actions. There's two issues that I'd like a little bit of more information about. The one is also around SONA, about Mr. Matthews assaulting a female SABC reporter. Who was that reporter and what was the issue around that? And then about the reporter who had who was computer confiscated, who was interrogated for 2 hours. Who was that, and how was that matter resolved? And by the way, Chair, I think we do need to maybe call, echo what Honorable Chauke said earlier. The State Security Agency needs to be called in and held accountable for their role in interfering in employee relations at the SABC.
Thanks very much. Mr. Jimmy Matthews, for me, I mean, I made the point earlier on that he was one of the very first people to ever do or say something to me that I thought was, you know, a little bit outside of the boundaries. Also, growing up, for me, Mr. Jimmy Matthews was like one of those people. You know, he had he was a journalist back in the struggle days. You know, he was a camera person, I think a photographer. So I mean, his father is a well-known author. So he was that guy, you know, who I looked up to and be like, you know, one day would like to be like that. So when he did what he did to me, yeah. And also then on the day when he actually resigned, it was the day when I then issued the statement that I did criticizing the SABC. I had felt that Mr. Matthews had let us down. You know, he really had, because it was wrong of him to first resign and then come and say what he needed to say and said what was happening at the SABC is wrong. Why couldn't he say that stuff when he was inside? You know, I thought it was... Let me not go there. But no, I thought it was cowardly. Yeah, so, anyway. Ma'am, I think when it comes to the my colleague in the office whose computer was confiscated, I think I'll have to ask for her permission, and then maybe if she agrees, it's a name that I could forward to the committee. But yeah, I would hate to have to publicly declare her name, and maybe she might be uncomfortable. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Please do have that conversation, and can that information be forwarded to the Chair? I think the State Security Agency link definitely needs to be investigated. And then I want to talk a little bit more about the death threats. There is a question I held back earlier because I assumed the two of you would speak about it, but you haven't spoken about the death threats. Are you still being threatened?
Ma'am, me personally, no. I have never been threatened. Because anyway, I've never been threatened. And the reason why we didn't, Mr. Mvoko mentioned a little bit earlier on. One of the reasons why we felt that it's better for us to try and protect the guys that had been threatened, kind of shield them from coming here and because we'd hate to be seen as being antagonistic to the people behind the threats. And that is and we also did not want to make that, because we knew that if Suna, for instance, came here, it might become the key focus. And while we adore and respect Suna, we didn't want that to be the focus, because there's this issue here that if this is dealt with and it's dealt with properly, it will by default deal with the other issue of the threats and all of those things. And that's the reason why we collectively took a decision to kind of protect them and to shield them, because we want to make this the focus.
I would argue that that issue is actually intrinsically linked with what is happening. It's not a separate issue. It's about an individual or individuals who are willing to intimidate, try and kill people in order to protect themselves against being held accountable for state capture, for corruption, for violating the Constitution. So I think it's very much a relevant issue. I want to know, what was the wording of the threats? What did they say? If you don't do X, we will do X. What is it that they wanted you to stop doing? What was the wording? And also, what form did the threats come in? Was it an SMS? Was it a letter with letters cut out from a magazine? What form did the threats come in?
From what I've seen,
50 seconds.
From what I've seen, ma'am, most of the threats were SMS form, and they essentially would say the one SMS that I'd seen was, we know that the girl, just before the budget, then we know that the girl is going to Cape Town. She must stay away from Parliament, otherwise this time we won't miss. This was after the incident where Ms. Venter's car had been shot at. So those were the kinds, just to let you know that we were watching. Basically, or that we are watching, we're monitoring the movements and those kinds of things. Those are from what I've seen.
Quickly, the other one was just for us to withdraw our Concord case.
Yes. Honorable Chauke. Are we going this way? I'm chairing.
I'm giving, thank you. Young Patrick, among us, you come back to me. Unkata half foot mautanda, angas with Dungenza. But I, Chair. No, Chair. Chair, the bigger picture, I think it's now coming to place. I'm going to speak, and it was going to be more of a comment. But now, because you came as a group that represents a group of 8, I'm going to appreciate if any of you can speak, within 4 of you. My looking at things starts with this relationship of a TNA. The TNA relationship that starts with a friendship, a relationship between Hlaudi Motsoeneng and TNA. this relationship then gets introduced into SABC. It gets rejected. It then moves to another level, which is where it is currently now on the NN7, whatever you call it. But in the process of this relationship, the board of SABC collapsed, meaning that those who are in support thrive, those who are not slowly get. Sorry? So I must keep quiet. No, they said I must keep quiet, Chair. These people who are pointing at me, this thing is called. I'm saying serious stuff now, that's why it must happen. Can I proceed, Chair? Again. Now, let me just come back to this point, Chair. That it's a bigger picture that all of us must never lose sight of. Because throughout the rest of the presentation we have listened to, it starts from this relationship of the TNA. It then moves to weakening the organization. Then you then hit the board, you collapse the board. Having collapsed the board, the next step is to collapse the executive. Now, both the board, which is the accounting authority, has collapsed. In fact, it's non-functional. But look, we're still benefiting in the process, right? The executive is in tatters. And this executive chair is the executive that is not vetted. It's people with their own agendas in the executive and all of that. Now, it has now moved to yourselves, core people of SABC. I mean, I've known you for many years, all of you seated here, for many years. Now, this thing has now moved to you. It's now collapsing that core. And this core is really collapsed. It has collapsed, this core. And you come back, you look at the behavior of outsiders that comes in. Now, I'm going to ask you to comment on this narrative that I'm putting. Look at how Brian Molefe comes into the picture. Look at the relationship of Brian Molefe and the Guptas. Look at the relationship of Brian Molefe and Hlaudi Motsoeneng. You don't separate that. It's one people. Authority, control, pointing fingers, pushing everybody. They're in charge, right? Now, Chairperson, my take is that this will not only require this party position that this party will do this, one will do this. It's going to require this focus that we have started here, because the issue we're dealing with is not a small issue. This issue, in fact, is collapsing SABC. It's collapsing it. As we speak now, in fact, I don't know how it survives, because if you have listened to other speakers who came before, the question that you'll ask obvious, what is this thing? Why is it still breathing? You know, the fact is that it has collapsed. It has collapsed clearly because of a particular strategy that has been driven throughout. So you as senior journalist, you have done this assessment, I think, on your own. And I think it's an opportunity that when we engage now, as we close, I'm not the last speaker of yours, but you must be able to share with us this observation. What do you see? This wonderful, crafted, well-oiled machinery within a very short space of time. Now, I don't want to deal much with your political leadership there, because sometimes they fall into this trap without really knowing that there's a particular relationship that exists that has captured SABC to that extent. So my comment, therefore, is that I have learned so much in the whole process, but I think the bigger picture is that SABC will have to collapse. What is going to rise, obvious, that TNA, with its own interest, you'll see them rising. Currently, it survive. We are funding an opposition organization. We are funding it directly so, with monies of the public, which is your NN7 program. In fact, you see it in the screen when you watch that program. So I think this thing is bigger than what we may think. This is a serious threat to democracy. It's a serious threat to democracy. It's a serious threat, in fact, not only to democracy, but to the revolution. Because what we stood for, what we stand for, is being eroded by this exercise. That started at the top with the friendship that has collapsed this whole system now. We have what we call, we're just reading obituary of SABC as we engage currently now. We don't have the organization there. So I'm saying that let us be honest, factual, and I think that what is very critical is the points that were raised by other colleagues here. Critical points that, but why can't we pin down the issue of who is this power? This power, where does it lie? I will tell you where the power lies. The power lies with TNA. That's where the power is. That's where the power is. Because if TNA did not have power, it would not exist anywhere. A TNA that come with a 3-pager to want to take over a news channel. That's power. And they have not gone away, they're still there. So I'm saying that, colleagues, that we need to help each other. And I'm happy that in your input, Vuyo, you spoke more of party interference, which was dealt with. And it's a non-issue, in fact, to be very honest with you, to that extent. The issue is what we are dealing with here, the total control of SABC. And this is what is happening. So, Chair, those are my points, JPL. It's a general issue, but I will definitely require colleagues who are here just to make their own input. It's my own observation, by the way, based on what we have received. That Prof. Magube, he may not even know, in fact, that there's a relationship that exists such deep that he will not even understand it. And he's busy making us jump left and right without understanding what. Here you are dealing with something that is well prepared. Well prepared. So, Chair, those are my comments, Chair, and I think that I'll definitely be happy to look at. Currently, what is happening is that you now have Claudi Mutsunen with this group now. He has created his own independent group. I mean, the names that you have mentioned of the 5 or 6 people that were calling journalists to appear before them, that is a group that operates. It's unfortunate that the Kaiser happened to be one of those, and it's one of those people that we believe that they are tried and tested. You know, people who have worked at SABC, have known them for many years. It's really shocking that it is controlled by that group. That group does not even have the mandate. Now, the issue that will have to come in of your Chair moving forward will be all this irregular, fruitless, wasteful. I maintain this one throughout my questions and comments. Irregular, fruitless, and wasteful monies of the public must be recovered. That money must come back. Every little cent of it must come back to the state. You know. So thank you very much, and those are my just comments.
Now, I'm not going to even allow you to respond because this man took 8 minutes. You're not going to be allowed to respond, young men. Last.
Thank you, Chairperson.
You've got 5 minutes.
Chairperson, I just wanted to ask, how is it possible that we have a constitution, that we have a Broadcasting Act, where independence of news and of views and all of that is captured in the charter of the corporation, and where it is stipulated that there must be freedom of expression and journalistic, creative and programming independence, that we have a grouping of people who effectively hijack the public broadcaster for specific interests, be it their own or external factors. How did that come about? I know that Vuyo has said Parliament also and we accept a responsibility that there was not an effective oversight conducted over the SABC. Not for lack of trying, but yes, it was certainly not good enough. But how did that happen? And what was the What was the moment? Was it when Mr. Motswaneng was appointed? Did he appoint himself as editor-in-chief? How did all of that come about? If you could just please tell us in very sort of succinct terms, what prompted this position that we find that people just followed into groupings and supported him and in fact acted on his instruction.
Ma'am, if I may, just very shortly, and then I'll let Vuyo handle the rest. I think within the SABC, it's an open secret. I think everybody talks about it like as if, our understanding is that Mr. Motswaneng has got the support of the president. Right, it's spoken about within the SABC. Apparently, I don't know if he has like his direct number or he's got on speed dial. That's how it's spoken about in the office. So, and also Mr. Motswaneng has lived up to it, because he's behaved in a manner that none of us can explain, other than to say, well, surely this guy must have the protection and the support of somebody that's very important, that's very powerful. Otherwise, how else do you describe it? Mr. Motswaneng once, he'd come to see us in Parliament. And one of the statements that he made was that, if we thought that he was, if we were impressed by the thought that he was earning, I think 2.6 million rand a month or a year, he said that was nothing because he wanted 10. That's what he said. It was one of those things where it's uncanny when he walks around. There's someone in our office that once said that they love Mr. Motswaneng because he was an organic intellectual. I took him apart, like completely. I shredded him apart because I asked him how he could make an argument like that, If I could explain it, ma'am, I would tell you. But the way that I understand it, the way that some of my colleagues understand it, is that Mr. Motswaneng has got the support of no less a powerful person than the president.
Well, just to add very briefly, in the SABC newsroom, what Mr. Motswaneng has also made sure happens is that there would be people who would do exactly as he tells them to do. That he would promote you today for you to deliver on what he wants that evening. And if you don't do that, as Krivani said earlier, he makes the rules and he breaks the rules. And there's no doubt, and this links to what Honorable Chauke was saying earlier, that money is involved here. How else do you explain groups of people who rock up at court cases to be friends of this or friends of that or banning him and that sort of thing? It's clear that something is going on there. Perhaps the extent to which and who directly benefits and whether there are bags of money doing the rounds, I think those are the things that are worth investigating. But the net effect of everything that has happened is that corruption has taken place, number one. Number two, the national public broadcaster is being destroyed from within.
Ten seconds.
Now, I just wanted to make the point, sir, that also recently we've been hearing quite a lot, for instance, about the protection of Mr. Motswaneng's rights and the board's rights and the chairperson's rights and everything. And we've just been wondering that when we were all fired, there was no protection of our rights because we were fired without even being taken to a disciplinary hearing. So who gets their rights protected within the SABC and who gets their rights violated. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before I close, let me just make 2 points to the committee. I recall that when we started, we took a collective decision that we'll have only 5 minutes per person. And I was lenient today, and that leniency creates a bit of chaos. From tomorrow, it will be 5 minutes. Regardless of how important, it's how you manage your questions and so on, because it's just going to create problems for all of us. So I'm warning you that that's how it'll happen tomorrow, because we will have a whole week to debate, honourable members, ourselves. We'll have a whole week to debate these matters, but maybe we clear that so that we don't have problems going forward. To the SABC 8, thank you very much for attending. We understand, and we did say it when we responded to somebody, that we are sensitive to concerns that others had when they wanted to have this in closed session. But we committed to open, transparent, and all those good things. So whilst we knew that you were the first people that sort of raised the idea of security concerns and so on, we're grateful that you eventually decided to come here, because we can't have this type of a meeting in closed session. We just cannot have it. So grateful for coming whilst we are not insensitive to the real threat to you and everybody else that comes here. But we will reiterate, as we've done all along, that ours is to plead to every South African that nobody that comes to this committee must feel intimidated or be intimidated. And we will continue to appeal to the law enforcement agencies to make that happen. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much, because we had to make you wait an hour because of other proceedings. And when we eventually get to our point of writing our report, all these things will be taken into consideration. And we said to everybody else, and we're saying it to you, that our process ends on the 28th of February. If between today and the 28th of February, there's something that you'd like to share with the committee, please feel free to bring it forward. We will share it with the committee so that it's made public and it is incorporated into our report. It's certainly not the end of the road now. All of you should do that if you wish to do that. There's nobody from the SABC who would want to test your allegations, so you're free from that part of it. If we don't see you between now and Christmas, have a happy festive break, and may 2017 be better than 2016 for all of us. Honourable members, please wait. We indicated to you that we've got some information on a flash disk for you. Please collect your flash disk before you go, flash drive before you go. And we reconvene in this venue at 9:30 tomorrow morning. Meeting is adjourned for tonight. Thank you very much.